Okay, hello everyone. My name is Selina, and I am a PhD candidate at University of Oxford, where I've recently passed my viva on my research about game cheating communities. So my thesis that I worked on the past couple of years, it focused on it was basically an exploratory investigation into how game cheating communities operate and the different modes of social bonding that are often glossed over due to the social stigma that's tied to cheating. And the study that I will present to you today forms the final part of this thesis that consolidates together my years of findings and talks about the key issues that really stood out to me that I think would be relevant to other industries as well, not just restricted to gaming, but other um, industries, which I will divulge into. So for those of you who are not familiar, game cheating is defined as the act of gaining an unfair advantage over opponents by violating the rules set by the game operators. In the context of multiplayer games, that's often in the form of manipulating the code or memory of games. You might have come across aimbots or trigger bots. And in academic literature, game cheating is predominantly discussed in the context of harm in itself, and the way it um, negatively impacts user engagement, user experience, or financially, reputationally damaging the game publishers. However, in the recent years, the authorities around the world are becoming increasingly worried about the general kind of harmful behaviors that they have observed within the gaming environment that go beyond the mere playful purpose of gaming. So, for instance, the Anti-Defamation League released a framework in 2020 that talked about that, demonstrated a spectrum of disruptive behaviors that they have observed, and they talked about how cheating and game manipulation themselves are considered a form of disruptive behavior. On a similar note, the UK National Crime Agency released a report in 2017 talking about how cheating forms a pathway for some young gamers into their first engagement in cybercrime. And this comes to show that cheating can not only be disruptive in itself, but also be closely associated with other forms of disruptive behaviors. And overall, we lack this idea of what are the kind of social elements that are embedded in cheating which we think it's potentially due to the prevailing view of cheating as an isolated act, as opposed to more of a broader phenomenon that is simultaneously influenced by other kind of social networks, and also probably further perpetuated by the social stigma that, surrounds the concept of cheating. Why investigate further into the whole world of cheating if there are so much more other things to learn about the mainstream land of gaming? So I wanted to take this opportunity to really move away from the conventional individualistic perspective and look into the intrasocial perspective. So there have been some studies done looking at how cheaters embedded in a network of non-cheaters impact others, but little understanding both qualitatively and quantitatively of how cheaters among themselves mingle, essentially. And that's what my thesis set out to do. And the study looked at the specific red flags that stood out regarding some of the modes of bondings that had existed. So to do this, we built a conceptual framework following these 4 steps, which involved first mapping out the interview data that have been collected in the span of 2 years during COVID era period between 2020 and 2022. And in step 2, we looped this together with literature survey in game cheating into Javarine's 8-step conceptual framework analysis. And upon finishing that, we reviewed the framework together with experts in the relevant industries to gather feedback on their applicability. And finally, we revised the framework according to the feedback and incorporated that in the discussion. Just small information on the participant demographics of those who were part of that interview. So 60% of those who were part of it were below the age of 21, and they reported that they started as early as 12. And the gender was 84% of them self-identified to be male. And the top two most common geographical bases were in Europe for 35% and North America for 23%. The participants had experienced cheating in Counter-Strike, Global Offensive, CSGO, as well as hacking and modding in GTA 5 Online. The remains, they also had experience, they had different kind of semantics to refer to what they did, but what they all had in common is that they were essentially violating the rules set by the game operators, and that's how we decided that these games would be part of it. So some of the other games that they had experienced then also included World of Warcraft, Dota 2, as well as Dark Souls. And as mentioned, they were collected over the span of 2020 and 2022. So it might be worth considering that, you know, this was a very special period. So the following framework delineates 4 social collectives that are each distinguished by the primary motivations for engagement, for joining the collective, individual practices, that is the nature of the observed practice, as well as the governing practices, that is the mechanisms that basically allow for the successful maintenance of the observed collective. Starting from the left, the peer groups are a small group of users, usually less than 10, who are often already familiar with one another offline. They usually gather to play together as teams or opponents, experimenting with different kinds of cheats, the latest cheats in games. The single interest crowds, the second one, are a group of users who assemble for the purpose of completing a specific task, often to enhance cheating capabilities. And a third, we refer to a group that evolves further beyond this point as a multi-interest community. And that can be branched down further into whether they are solely dedicated to competitive games or also to activities beyond games. The 3 elements that are mentioned on the left progressively sort of cascade to the right as the structure was larger. It's worth mentioning that each of the section here serves as a pathway into more in-depth discussions, but due to the focus of this specific presentation and the time constraints, I'll only provide an overview and focus on the latter 2 columns. But you can find detailed elaborations of these other sections in my PhD thesis that will be publicized in a few weeks' time. So for the peer groups, they embody an initial stage of the social collectives. They bring together users for various reasons, as something as interest in forming covert alliances with other players, to simply wanting to gain unfair advantages and learning what the latest tips and tricks are. And the users learn by observing the trial and error processes alongside their peers. Given their relatively small size, peer groups help foster an ad hoc social experience centered around their shared interest in game cheating and help organize meetups for small, intimate events. And on the other hand, the single interest crowd is characterized by users who converge with a shared objective and typically focus on augmenting their cheating capabilities or solving tasks together. They may want to gain access to more reliable and accurate information, given the risks associated with cheating and being detected cheating in games, as well as the opportunity to engage with others who share a similar interest and view on the concept of cheating. There is a heightened emphasis placed on safeguarding the information within that group, within that crowd, and drawing the right individuals to the crowd. For instance, they establish private chat groups, where they shield the information from the public, and this allows them to control access and vet processes, or apply stringent membership criteria to ensure only the participants the ones that are already inside it, deem fitting, can be granted access. There's also stringent policy on the transparency of the information that are shared within such crowds, finding out where they came from. Did the people actually write it, or was it a copy paste? Cautioning against where they copy pasted from, because if that's something that's already been detected by the game companies, that kind of loses value. Next, we've got the multi-interest community, because it's a bit mouthful, I'm just going to call it MICs. So MICs are expansive iterations of the social collectives that are unified by this common interest in game cheating. They as mentioned, are distinguished by whether they're exclusive to gaming or have a broader spectrum of activities that include but are not limited to games. And players with a desire in the MIC that's focused on games, players with a desire to explore new styles of the games, often through the integration of downloadable contents or updates, are often the ones attracted to this kind of community. Users may also uncover opportunities for financial gains through dedicated roles that are related to cheating, such as cheat development or setting out their own kind of entrepreneurship. So some users may take proactive measures to foster a cohesive and supportive community environment, taking initiatives such as creating discussion forums, organizing community events. And some are also involved in the actual setup and configuration, maintenance of the gaming servers. The most common one being the hack versus hack servers, it's basically a game server dedicated to cheating that attracts people together and basically flaunt who has the best and the latest cheat software possible. And this kind of repeated exposure allows them to get a more hands-on understanding of the inner workings of the cheating tools that they're using. But part of this also obviously includes learning to reverse engineer and inspecting the game software itself, as opposed to using just off-the-shelf products. And more importantly, so there are certain segments of the community that are known to frequently engage in harmful behaviors directed at beginners or unfamiliar users of cheating. And this creates a challenging environment for the newcomers that are attempting to assimilate into this community. Ironically, this creates this cycle where only those who are very good at cheating are the ones that are invited into the aforementioned private groups and so. And the toxic behaviors encompass a wide range that can extend from relatively less severe actions like just trolling and flaming to more, something that sounds straight up like a cyber threat, such as a DDoS attack or doing a rat onto the victim's computer. The governance mechanisms basically assume a more formalized structure that have been familiar in other forms of general communities, such as defining and formalizing specialized roles and responsibilities. And lastly, the MICs that go beyond games, they exhibit analogous characteristics as the previous one, but they do not define their interests and activities strictly to gaming. They actually, while they do experiment with games, that it transcends the conventional boundaries of just seeking playfulness. And we view that this actually applies to both of it, the previous one, but there's a tendency for the members to gravitate towards groups that resonate with their ideological beliefs. For instance, one thing that really stood out to me is the community's attitude towards reverse engineering cheats. So while the cheats are very widespread and reverse engineering activities are really widespread too, applying them to specific cheats that are known to be written by renowned members are known to draw a very strong approval and can even lead to punitive actions, such as being banned from a very exclusive private group. And this is in contrast with other kinds of general communities where, reverse engineering tools is kind of maybe even welcomed in order to harden the software and get rid of the vulnerabilities. And this comes to show that these community actions are not just merely about one's inclination to cheat, but also being part of a community where cheating itself is seen as one part of a broader spectrum of legally gray activities. Another example is sharing hacked gaming accounts. This kind of action would border on cybercrime in alternative contexts, but they're normalized in this kind of community due to their cultural values. These communities may see extensions of their actions into other kind of malicious activities beyond the confines of gaming, such as they call it hacking or leak forums as opposed to merely cheating forums, which refers to, as mentioned, leaking accounts, personal details that are used in gaming. So it's not directly influencing one's ability to play, but rather one's, I would say, like the personal credentials that are used for it. And this is in line with the NCA's argument that I mentioned early on about how this may pave a pathway. And so moving on. So this framework, as previously mentioned, is designed to aid professionals from various industries that might be influenced by or connected to the act of cheating. And we wanted to determine how applicable this would be in real life. So we carried out the reviews, like we carried out interviews with these people to understand like how, like whether any of these elements are familiar and what parts of it would be, really helpful for them to divulge further into. And we recruited people from involved in the gaming industry, the nonprofit industry, that focus on the welfare of the game players, and the cybersecurity and law enforcement. It is important to remember that because these are so widely varied, they do hold different objectives and concerns for the respective industries. For instance, like a company in one specific industry might focus more on the profitability, whether it's manageable under the financial constraints, and the other one would be caring more about the actual vulnerable users, and prioritizing that and how in order to identify who the victims are. The experts involved, mix of senior and mid-level experts in their respective industries. And so the experts did express a familiarity with the framework, and drawing from their first-hand experiences with the various aspects, such as the private forums that I mentioned, or the leader or cult-based network that was very distinct in these kind of communities. There were also new perspectives, such as, there's the distinctions that are made within cheating that show that there are actually some aspects of cheating that demand more attention, as opposed to sort of looping that all together as in a negative light. And in a similar way, in the context of cybercrime, they said that this can really help provide more granular insights into the way the policies that tackle the pathway can be made. So one participant expressed their concerns surrounding the unchecked negative behaviors in this way, which I thought was really quite well put. The lack of moderation makes a space where the community becomes permissive of expressions that in other spaces wouldn't be permitted, or there would be significant pushback. You have a permissive culture and a permissive platform that allows for a culture of hate and harassment to form. In these spaces that then are not invisible to other people, to people who would hold these companies, platforms, people accountable. So together with the expert feedback, the framework identifies three main areas that require focus. One is how prevalent the toxic behaviors are. They are trivialized. We noticed, so I didn't divulge too much into it, but there's different modes of toxic behaviors that exist, and regardless of the fact that some are so much more severe than the others, they're all together trivialized as being just for play. It's part of the community, it's part of the culture. And to make it worse, a lot of these go underreported due to the stigma that's associated with cheating. Many of the people who are engaged with this kind of community don't deem themselves as a legitimate part of the gaming community. And considering that much of the player base tends to be really young or vulnerable, it's something to consider, especially with regards to the extent to which these behaviors can impact these players. And secondly, we noticed that there's misaligned norms that stem from the competitive nature of the gaming itself, as seen in the example of the reverse engineering, and banning reverse engineering of cheat software just because they have to worship a specific renowned person, without really thinking about the ethical grounds of their actions. And this calls for the need to provide a more explicit ethical guidance to help promote the well-being of such users. And lastly, there is an unchecked growth of the groups, public and private, that are involved in legally gray areas that are not limited to gaming. There is a specific attention on the cheat sellers and developers that repurpose their social network and the knowledge that they have honed over the years for transfer into other domains. And this calls for a closer monitoring. I've provided some possible examples that could be used to address these, such as anonymous reporting and support mechanism to allow victims to report without backlash. Second, providing a tailored educational resources in non-gaming environments, such as resources that educate users on cybersecurity threats. And lastly, dedicating a closer monitoring mechanism for a developer, like open source developer mechanisms where such cheat projects are shared, or even the public and private chat rooms to understand who the key actors are and what's the trajectory in which these groups are evolving. So overall, contrary to the perception of being mere rule breakers, these communities emerge as complex entities that comprise not only perpetrators of harm, but also victims. And as such, the expert evaluations that we've carried out have verified the adaptability of the framework across different sectors that are keen on better understanding the phenomena of cheating. Overall, we argue that this framework calls for the need for a more explicit cross-industry collaborations to combat these kind of issues that arise from the ecosystem of game cheating that has predominantly been on the blind side until now. And this is so that we could ensure a safer environment for those involved in it, especially who are young or vulnerable. And we believe that no single sector alone can effectively tackle these challenges that arise from the vast network of the online interactions. And we think that not only the gaming industry, but also law enforcement and social platforms where these kind of activities are seen, such as Reddit and Discord, should come together and have a more regular communication, just so they can align the initiatives together. And that's it in terms of my talk. Thank you so much for listening.